The lock did not fit. I stood on the porch of my aunt's lakefront property, key in hand, and turned it again. Nothing. The deadbolt did not even catch. It just spun. I stepped back and looked at the door more carefully. It was new. The hardware was shiny, brushed nickel, still with that factory-clean look. The original door had been old oak with a brass knob. I remembered it because my aunt used to hang a wreath on it every Christmas. This was not the same door. I pulled out my phone and called the property attorney. Straight to voicemail. It was a Saturday morning, late September, the kind where the air smells like pine and lake water and everything feels calm. The lake was right there, maybe 40 feet past the back deck, flat and silver in the early light. I walked around the side of the house. That is when I heard voices. Not inside. Coming from the dock. 2 people. A couple. Laughing. Dragging rolling luggage down the wooden planks toward a waiting car on the side road that ran along the water. They had coffee cups. Matching overnight bags. The kind of ease that comes from a good night's sleep in someone else's nice house. I watched them load the car and drive off. I stood there for a long moment. Then I walked to the back of the house and looked through the sliding glass door. The place had been redecorated. Not badly. Actually, someone had put real money into it. New sectional white linen throw pillows, a driftwood coffee table that looked deliberately rustic. There was a small chalkboard sign on the kitchen counter. I pressed my face close enough to the glass to read it. Welcome to Lake Haven Retreat. Wi-Fi. Lake Haven 224. Checkout is 11 a.m. Please strip the beds. Thanks for staying. I straightened up slowly. I turned around and looked at the property next door. The house was bigger. Newer. Professionally landscaped, even in autumn. There was a black SUV in the driveway, and a small sign near the mailbox that I recognized immediately, the kind HOAs sometimes put up. A logo. A name. I had seen that name in my aunt's paperwork. Diane Holloway. HOA board president. As I stood there reading it, the front door of that house opened. A woman walked out in a cream-colored cardigan, holding a coffee mug. She looked at me the way people look at something they were not expecting to see. Not surprised exactly. More like calculating. She smiled. It did not reach her eyes. "Can I help you?" she called across the yard. I looked at the key in my hand, then back at her. "I own this property," I said. The smile did not move. "Oh," she said, "you must be Margaret's nephew." She already knew who I was. That told me everything. I did not answer her right away. That was intentional. When someone already knows who you are before you have introduced yourself, the smart move is to slow down. Let them talk. Let them fill the silence. People who are hiding something almost always do. Diane took a small step forward on her porch. "Your aunt was a wonderful woman. We were all so sorry to hear about her passing." "Thank you," I said. Flat. Polite. Nothing more. She tilted her head slightly. "Are you planning to visit for a while, or just here to handle the estate?" There it was. She wanted to know how long I was staying. She wanted to know what I knew. "Still figuring things out," I said. She nodded slowly, that smile still sitting on her face like a piece of furniture that did not quite fit the room. "Well, if you need anything, HOA documents, community guidelines, anything like that, my door is always open. We like to make sure new property owners get properly oriented." Properly oriented. I kept my expression neutral. "I appreciate that." She went back inside. I turned back to the house and pulled out my phone. This time I did not call the attorney. I opened the Airbnb app and typed in the address. It took about 4 seconds. Lake Haven Retreat. Lakefront gem on Crystal Cove. Sleep 6. 289 nights. Superhost. There were 47 reviews. The oldest one was dated 14 months ago, 5 months before my Aunt Margaret passed away. I sat down on the porch steps and scrolled through them. Perfect getaway. Host was so responsive. Magical views. We will definitely be back. Cozy, clean, beautifully decorated. Highly recommend. The host name was listed as D. Holloway. I read that twice. Then I took a screenshot and kept scrolling. The listing had a 5-star average across all 47 reviews. The calendar showed it had been booked nearly every weekend for over a year. Some weeks had back-to-back reservations, Thursday through Sunday, then Sunday through Wednesday. At $289 a night, even at 60% occupancy, That was somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000 over 14 months. In my aunt's house. Without my aunt's knowledge. I thought about the couple I would watch walk off the dock that morning. The rolling luggage. The coffee cups. The easy laughter. They had paid for that stay. They had left a review. And every dollar of it had gone directly into Diane Holloway's account. My aunt had been sick for the last 2 years of her life. Mostly bedridden in the final 8 months. She had not been able to travel to the property. She would not have known. Diane had known that. I stood up, pocketed my phone, and looked at the changed lock on the front door. Then I looked at the house next door. The curtain in the front window moved. I did not confront her that day. I know that is what most people would have done. March over there, knock on the door, demand answers. But I have learned that the first move matters more than people realize. If you go in loud and emotional, you telegraph everything you know. You give the other person time to prepare. Time to delete things, contact lawyers, build a story. I needed to understand the full picture first. I drove to the nearest hardware store, bought a locksmith kit and a temporary padlock, and called a licensed locksmith to meet me at the property. Within 2 hours, I had new keys and a proper deadbolt installed on every entry point. That was step 1. Secure the asset. While the locksmith worked, I sat in my car and started building a file. I am an accountant by trade. Not a flashy job. Not the kind of background that sounds impressive at dinner parties. But what it means is that I know how to read documents, trace money, and build a timeline. I know what evidence looks like, and I know how to organize it so it tells a story clearly, in sequence, without gaps. My aunt, Margaret Elaine Corbin, had owned this property for 31 years. She bought it in 1993, 2 years after her divorce, with money she had saved for over a decade. She used to call it her proof. Proof. Proof that she did not need anyone else to build something worth having. She left it to me in her will with one instruction. Do not let them take it from you. At the time I read that, I thought it was just something old people say. A general warning. A piece of sentiment. Standing in that driveway, I understood it differently. The property was part of the Crystal Cove Lakefront community, a small HOA of 19 homes established in 1988. My aunt had been a founding member. She had helped write the original CC&Rs. She had served on the board twice. And somewhere along the way, Diane Holloway had taken over. I had found 3 letters in my aunt's paperwork, all from the HOA, all signed by Diane. The first was dated 3 years ago, a routine notice about updated community guidelines. The second, 18 months ago, was a fine notice, $200 for unauthorized exterior modifications. The third, 8 months ago, 2 weeks after my aunt entered hospice care, was a notice of property access authorization granted to the HOA board for maintenance and safety inspections. That last one had a signature line. My aunt's name was signed on it. I stared at that signature for a long time. My aunt had advanced Parkinson's by then. Her hands shook badly. She could not hold a pen reliably in her final months. That signature was smooth, steady, perfectly formed. It was not hers. I photographed that signature 3 times. Different angles, different lighting. Then I placed it next to a birthday card my aunt had sent me 2 years before she got bad. Her real handwriting, looping and slightly left-leaning, the way it had always been. The kind of handwriting that carries a person's personality in every curve. The signature on the HOA document was nothing like it. Same letters, wrong person. I did not say that out loud to anyone yet. I just saved everything to a secure folder on my phone and kept moving. The attorney finally called me back that afternoon. His name was Gerald Patton, a quiet man in his 60s who had handled my aunt's estate for years. When I told him about the Airbnb listing, the changed locks, and the access authorization letter, there was a long pause on the line. How long has the listing been active? He asked. 14 months, I said. 47 reviews. Superhost status. Another pause, longer this time. Marcus, he said. That is my name, Marcus Corbin. The estate did not close until 6 weeks ago. Technically. During probate, the property was still under Margaret's name. No one had legal authority to rent it. I know, I said. And that access authorization letter, I know that too. He exhaled slowly. Okay. Do not touch anything inside yet. I want you to do a full walkthrough and document everything, every piece of furniture, every modification, Every item that was not there when Margaret last occupied it. Take video, not just photos. Time-stamped. I was already heading to the front door with my phone out. The inside of the house stopped me for a moment. It was not just the new furniture. The whole layout had been subtly shifted to maximize the guest experience. The spare bedroom had been converted into a bunk room, 2 sets of wooden bunk beds, probably to boost the Sleep 6 listing. My aunt's personal items had been removed. Her bookshelf, her ceramic collection, the framed cross-stitch her mother had made, all gone. In the main bathroom there was a branded amenity basket. Small soaps, a candle, a folded card that read Lake Haven Retreat. We hope you feel at home. There was a QR code on the card. I scanned it. It linked to a private guest portal. Reviews, house rules, a welcome video. The welcome video was 30 seconds long. It showed the exterior of the house, the dock, the lake view. Soft music. No people. Just property. My property. Being sold to strangers weekend after weekend for over a year. I finished the walkthrough. 41 minutes of time-stamped video. Every room, every modification, every branded guest item. I noted the bunk beds, the new appliances, a smart lock keypad that had been installed on the interior garage door. Then I sat down at the kitchen counter and looked at that chalkboard sign. Thanks for staying. I picked up a cloth and wiped it clean. The next morning, Diane came to me. I was on the back deck with coffee, watching the lake. Early light, mist still sitting on the water. The kind of quiet that makes you understand why my aunt called this place her proof. 31 years she had held on to this view. I was not going to let it go without a fight. I heard the side gate open. Diane walked across the yard like she owned it, which, I was beginning to understand, was exactly how she thought about it. She was dressed carefully. Pressed slacks, a fleece vest, pearl earrings. She carried a manila folder and wore the expression of someone delivering news they have already decided you will accept. Good morning, Marcus. She said my name like she would been using it for years. I thought we should talk. Sure, I said. I did not stand up. I did not offer her a seat. She paused slightly at that, then pulled out a patio chair and sat across from me anyway. I want to be straightforward with you, she said, setting the folder on the table. I have been managing this property for the past year or so, keeping it maintained, making sure it did not sit empty and deteriorate. Your aunt was very ill and could not be here, and vacant lakefront properties attract problems, vandalism, squatters, weather damage. She slid the folder toward me. I have kept detailed records. Every expense, every improvement. The furniture, the appliances, the maintenance costs. I think you will find I have actually added significant value to this property. I did not touch the folder. The rental income, I said. Where is that documented? She blinked. Just once. Fast. The rental income offset the management costs. It is all accounted for. All of it? Of course. I picked up my coffee. So you have records showing every booking, every nightly rate, every payout from Airbnb, and those records show the income balanced against your expenses? That is correct. And you have written authorization from my aunt or from the estate to operate a short-term rental business on this property? The folder stayed between us like a prop neither of us believed in. Marcus. Her tone shifted slightly. Still smooth, but with something underneath it now. A warning dressed as patience. I understand this is a lot to process. You have just inherited a significant asset you are grieving, and you are trying to make sense of things. I want to help you do that. I appreciate that, I said. The HOA has certain, let us call them established arrangements around here. Things that have developed over time to keep the community running well. It would really benefit you to understand those arrangements before you make any decisions. I looked at her then. Directly. What kind of arrangements? She smiled. The same smile from the day before. Measured. Practiced. Come to the board meeting Thursday night, she said. All will be explained. She left the folder on the table and walked back through the gate. I opened it as soon as she was gone. The top page was an invoice. Billed to the estate of Margaret Corbin. For property management services. $47,500. I read that invoice 3 times. Not because I did not understand it. Because I wanted to make sure I understood exactly what she was doing. Diane Holloway had rented my aunt's property for 14 months without authorization. She had collected somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000 in Airbnb income. And now she had handed me an invoice billing the estate for $47,500 in property management services. She was not just stealing. She was trying to get paid for it. I set the invoice down and looked at the rest of the folder. There were receipts. Furniture purchases, cleaning supplies, a plumber's visit, an electrician. All of it itemized, all of it dated, all of it adding up to just under the invoice total. It was neat work. Organized. The kind of documentation that looks legitimate at a glance. But I am an accountant. I looked closer. Several of the receipts were from businesses I did not recognize. No addresses, no tax ID numbers, no business license details. Just names and totals. The kind of receipts that are easy to fabricate and hard to verify. The furniture purchases had no model numbers, no store loyalty account references, nothing that would tie them to a real transaction record. And every single receipt was printed, not original copies. Printouts. I photographed each one and sent them to Gerald. He called me within the hour. She is trying to establish a quasi-contract, he said. If she can argue that the estate benefited from her services maintenance, improvements, property preservation, she could potentially claim unjust enrichment. Make it look like you owe her. Even without written authorization? She will argue implied authorization, that your aunt knew, consented informally, was incapacitated, and could not object. He paused. It will not hold up. But it is designed to muddy the water long enough to make you settle. She wants money, I said. She wants you to go away quietly, Gerald said. The invoice is an opening offer dressed as a bill. She is betting you do not know enough to fight it. I thought about that Thursday board meeting. The way she would said all will be explained, like she was doing me a favor. Like I was a guest in my own property story. Gerald, I said, I need to know exactly what rights the HOA has over individual properties in this community. CNRs, bylaws, board authority, everything. I will pull the original documents, he said. But Marcus, do not go to that meeting alone. I told him I would think about it. Then I spent the rest of the afternoon doing what I do best. I built a spreadsheet. Column A. Every Airbnb booking I could reconstruct from the listings review history dates, implied nightly rates, estimated revenue per stay. Column B. Diane's itemized expenses from her folder. Column C. The delta. When I finished, I sat back and looked at the number in column C. Even at conservative estimates, Diane Holloway had pocketed a minimum of $31,000 above her claimed expenses from my aunt's property, while my aunt was dying. I went to the board meeting. Gerald came with me. He did not wear a suit, just a plain button-down and slacks. He carried a legal pad and a pen and said almost nothing on the drive over. That was fine. I did not need him to talk. I needed him present. A witness with credentials. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a low cedar building near the entrance to the development. 8 folding chairs had been arranged in a rough semicircle facing a table at the front. 3 people sat at that table. Diane in the center. To her left, a heavy-set man named Roy Briggs, who I recognized from the HOA letterhead as the treasurer. To her right, a younger woman named Patrice Engel, listed as the Community Standards Officer, which I had learned was an invented title Diane had added to the bylaws 4 years ago. 4 residents sat in the audience chairs. I recognized one of them, an older man named Walt, who had waved at me from his driveway 2 days earlier. He nodded at me when I came in. Patrice watched Gerald with visible unease. Diane smiled her smile. Marcus, so glad you came. And you brought my attorney, I said. Gerald Patton. Roy shifted in his seat. Diane's smile did not move, but something behind her eyes recalibrated. Of course, she said. The more the merrier. The meeting opened with routine items. Maintenance schedules. A parking complaint. A discussion about repainting the entrance gate. Normal HOA business delivered in the flat, procedural tone of people who have done this too many times. Then Diane folded her hands on the table. I would like to address the matter of the Corbin property, she said. As the community is aware, we have been managing that property on behalf of the estate for the past year, ensuring it remained maintained and did not fall into disrepair during a difficult time. She said we, like the whole board, had been involved. Roy nodded on cue. We have submitted a formal invoice to the estate for those services, Diane continued, and we would like to discuss a path forward that works for everyone. She looked at me, inviting me to respond. What path did you have in mind? I asked. Well. She opened a folder of her own. The property has appreciated significantly since Margaret purchased it. Current market value in this community runs between $680,000 and $720,000, given the improvements we have made, arguably toward the higher end. She paused. The HOA would be prepared to facilitate a smooth transition if you decided to sell. We have interested buyers, community members who understand the value here. It could be a very clean process. There it was. She did not want money from the invoice. She wanted the property. The invoice was leverage. Pay up or sell. Either way, she won. Walt, the older man in the audience, cleared his throat quietly. He was looking at the table. I looked at Gerald. He wrote 2 words on his legal pad and slid it toward me. Do not respond. So I did not. The silence in that room lasted about 15 seconds. It felt longer. Diane kept her expression composed, but her fingers moved slightly against the folder. A small, unconscious tap. Once, twice. The tell of someone waiting for a reaction they would planned around. Gerald capped his pen. Thank you for the presentation, he said. His voice was even almost bored. We will review everything and be in touch. That was it. He stood up. I stood up. Diane's composure cracked just slightly. We would appreciate a response within the week. There are carrying costs involved in maintaining the property and we will be in touch, Gerald said again. We walked out. In the parking lot, Gerald unlocked his car and stood by the door for a moment, looking back at the clubhouse. She expected you to either capitulate tonight or come in swinging. She did not expect quiet. What does quiet do? I asked. It gives us time and gives her nothing to work with, he said. She does not know what you know. She does not know what we are building. Right now she thinks you are either scared or confused. Both of those work in our favor. I nodded. How do we proceed? 3 tracks simultaneously, he said. First, I file a formal objection to the invoice and request full financial disclosure, every booking record, every payout, every expense receipt with verifiable source documentation. She has to respond to that or she is in default. Second track? The signature on that access authorization letter. I have a forensic documents contact. Former FBI, works independently now. If that signature is forged, we have a criminal matter, not just a civil one. And the third track? Gerald looked at me over the roof of his car. The other residents. That meeting tonight, did you notice Walt? I had noticed Walt. The way he would look at the table when Diane made her pitch. Not bored. Not disinterested. The careful stillness of someone who has something to say and has decided this is not the moment to say it. He knows something, I said. My guess is he is not the only one, Gerald said. Diane has been running this HOA for 6 years. A person does not operate the way she is operating without leaving a trail of other people she has pressured or deceived along the way. He got in his car. I stood in the parking lot for another minute after his taillights disappeared. The night was clear and cold. I could see the lake from where I stood, a flat dark shape beyond the tree line, the moon doing something quiet on its surface. 31 years my aunt had held that view. I thought about what Gerald said. 3 tracks. Document request. Forensic analysis. Resident outreach. Clean, methodical, parallel. The kind of approach that does not make noise until it is ready to make a lot of it. I drove back to the property, made coffee, and started drafting a letter to Walt. Walt Greer had lived in Crystal Cove for 19 years. He was 71, a retired civil engineer, and he had known my aunt since she moved in. He told me all of this standing at his front door the morning after the board meeting, coffee mug in hand, screen door open just enough to talk through. I wondered when you would come by, he said. I had not called ahead. I would just knocked. He looked past me toward my aunt's house, then back at me, then opened the screen door the rest of the way. Come in. His kitchen was comfortable and lived in. Fishing maps on the wall, a dog-eared paperback on the table, dishes drying in a rack by the sink. He poured me coffee without asking and sat down across from me. How much do you know? He asked. Enough to have questions, I said. He nodded slowly, wrapped both hands around his mug. The Airbnb thing started about 2 months after Margaret went into hospice. I noticed the car's first different vehicles every few days, people I did not recognize coming and going from her dock. I asked Diane about it at a board meeting. He paused. She told me the estate had authorized a property management arrangement and that it was none of the community's concern. Did you believe her? No, he said simply. But I also did not have anything concrete. And Diane has a way of making you feel like asking questions is the problem. I understood that. I had felt it myself sitting across from her on the porch. She fined me last year, Walt continued. $300 for a storage shed that has been in my backyard for 11 years. Never an issue until I started asking questions about your aunt's property. He looked at his coffee. Roy Briggs got the same treatment 2 years ago when he pushed back on her expense reporting. She manufactured a complaint about his fence. He paid the fine and stopped pushing. She uses the fine system as a silencer, I said. That is exactly what she does. He looked up. There are at least 3 other homeowners here who have been fined in what I would call suspicious circumstances. All of them had raised concerns about how the HOA funds were being managed. All of them went quiet after the fines. I thought about that spreadsheet I had built, the $31,000 delta. And then I thought about HOA funds more broadly, dues, reserves, maintenance budgets, accounts that Diane as board president had direct access to. Walt, I said carefully, has anyone ever done a full audit of the HOA's financial accounts? He set his mug down. Diane blocked an audit request 4 years ago, he said. She amended the bylaws to require a 2/3 board vote to authorize one. She controls 2 of the 3 board seats. I sat with that for a moment. The Airbnb income might have been just the beginning. I spent the next 3 days making quiet visits. Not announcements. Not confrontations. Just knocks on doors, introductions, conversations over coffee or on front porches. I was Margaret Corbin's nephew. I had inherited the Lakefront property. I was trying to understand the community. That framing open doors. Literally. A woman named Susan Hale on the north end of the development told me Diane had fined her $450 2 years ago for wind chimes. Not oversized ones. Small ceramic chimes that had hung on her porch for a decade. The fine notice cited a noise ordinance that Susan had never seen in the original CC&Rs. When she asked to see the specific bylaw, Diane emailed her a document that looked different from the original community guidelines Susan had received when she moved in. A man named Dennis Park told me his HOA dues had increased 3 times in 4 years. Each increase came with a letter citing rising maintenance costs. But Dennis, a retired contractor, had walked the common areas carefully and could not identify any significant maintenance work that corresponded to those increases. And then there was Carol Weston. Carol was 68, soft-spoken, and she met me at her door with the expression of someone who had been waiting for permission to speak. She had been on the HOA board herself. 3 years ago. For 8 months before she resigned. We sat in her living room, and she told me what those 8 months had looked like from the inside. Diane controls everything, Carol said. The bank accounts, the vendor relationships, the meeting minutes. Roy does whatever she says. He has been her treasurer for 5 years, and I do not think he fully understands what he is signing. Patris was hired essentially as an enforcer. Her whole job is to find violations and issue fines. Where does the fine revenue go? I asked. Carol folded her hands in her lap. Into the HOA operating account, which Diane manages. The financial statements she presents at meetings are... She paused, choosing her words. Incomplete. Line items without backup documentation. Expenses that do not correspond to any work I could verify. Did you raise that while you were on the board? I tried, she said. Twice. The second time, Diane called an emergency session without notifying me properly and pushed through a bylaw amendment that restructured board voting procedures. Carol looked at the window. 3 weeks later, I received a certified letter informing me that my board seat had been vacated due to a procedural violation at the previous meeting. A meeting I had not been notified of. She had been removed from her own board seat through a meeting she was not told about. I thought about my aunt's forged signature, the access authorization letter. Smooth, steady handwriting on a document signed when my aunt's hands could no longer hold a pen. This was not one impulsive act of opportunism. This was a system. Built carefully, over years, by someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Gerald called me on a Friday morning with 2 pieces of news. The first was expected. Diane's attorney had responded to our financial disclosure request with a letter that was long on legal language and short on actual documents. They provided a summary sheet, totals only, No line item backup, no Airbnb payout records, no booking history. The letter argued that as HOA board president, Diane had operated under implied community authority, and that her property management activities had preserved asset value for the estate. It was a non-response designed to look like a response. She is stalling, Gerald said, buying time to clean up her records. Can she do that? She can try, but Airbnb maintains its own transaction records. I have already submitted a formal legal request for the booking and payout history associated with your aunt's property address. They will comply. They have to. He paused. The second piece of news is more significant. I waited. The forensic document examiner looked at the access authorization letter, the one with your aunt's signature. And? Definitive conclusion, Gerald said. The signature is not consistent with Margaret Corbin's known handwriting samples. The pen pressure, letter formation, and baseline angle are all inconsistent. The examiner's formal opinion is that the signature was produced by a different individual. I sat down. I had known it. Intellectually, I had been certain since the moment I would compared it to her birthday card. But hearing it stated formally, clinically, by a forensic expert who would stand behind that conclusion in court, that was different. That was the difference between suspicion and evidence. What does that mean legally? I asked. Document forgery is a criminal offense, Gerald said, depending on how it was used to gain property access. To establish false authorization for financial activities, we could be looking at fraud charges as well. This moves beyond civil court, Marcus. This is potentially a matter for law enforcement. When do we go to them? Not yet, he said. I want the Airbnb records first, and I want to understand the full scope of what she has done with HOA funds before we approach anyone. If there is embezzlement layered on top of the forgery and the unauthorized rental income, we want to present the complete picture at once. You do not get a second chance at a first report. He was right. I knew he was right. But I also knew that every day we waited, Diane was sitting next door in her pressed slacks and pearl earrings, managing her short-term rental calendar, and wondering why I had not responded to her invoice yet. I thought about something Gerald had mentioned early on, something I had filed away and not yet fully pursued. In most states, operating an unauthorized short-term rental generates tax liability. Airbnb income is reportable. If Diane had collected $40,000 to $60,000 over 14 months, and had not declared it, or had declared it in a way that obscured its source, that was a separate problem entirely, one with its own set of authorities. The Airbnb records arrived 12 days later. Gerald forwarded them to me on a Tuesday evening with a single line. It is worse than we estimated. I opened the file at my kitchen table in my aunt's house, my house with the lake doing its quiet thing outside the window. The document was 43 pages. Every booking, every payout, every transaction associated with the property address for the past 14 months. Total gross revenue, $68,400. I read that number twice. Then I read the payout account details. Every dollar had been deposited directly into a personal account registered to Diane Holloway. Not an HOA account, not a property management business account. A personal checking account in her name. There was no ambiguity in those records. No room for the implied authorization argument. No way to frame this as community stewardship or estate preservation. $68,000, taken from my aunt's property, deposited into Diane's personal account. While my aunt was dying, I called Gerald. I have already been in contact with a forensic accountant, he said before I could speak. She is going to cross-reference the Airbnb payouts against Diane's financial disclosure to us and against the HOA's reported income. If any of this money moved through HOA accounts at any point, even temporarily, we add embezzlement to the list. What is the list at now? I asked. Gerald went through it methodically. Unauthorized use of property. Conversion, which is the civil equivalent of theft. Document forgery. Potential fraud. Possible tax evasion on unreported rental income. And if the HOA funds examination revealed what Carol Weston and Dennis Park suspected, potential embezzlement of community funds on top of everything else. Gerald, I said, how does someone run this for 6 years without anyone stopping her? Isolation and intimidation, he said. She removed the one board member who pushed back. She fined anyone who asked questions. She controlled the information flow, the meeting minutes, the financial summaries, the bylaw amendments, and she picked her targets carefully. Elderly residents, people who did not have the energy or resources to fight back. A pause. Your aunt was the perfect target. Significant asset. No immediate family nearby. Deteriorating health. I thought about my aunt buying this property in 1993, saving for a decade. Building something that was entirely hers. Do not let them take it from you. She had known something was wrong. Maybe not the full scope of it, but she had felt it. Felt Diane's orbit tightening around the property in her final years. And she had done the only thing she could. She had left it to someone she trusted to fight back. I looked out at the lake. Then I opened my laptop and started drafting a formal complaint to the state attorney general's office. Not filing yet. Just building it. Clean, chronological, documented. Every piece of evidence attached and labeled. The way you build something meant to last. 3 things happened in the same week. The first was a letter from Diane's attorney. Formal, dense, and aggressive. It informed me that the HOA was initiating lien proceedings against the property for the unpaid invoice of $47,500. A lien would attach to the deed, clouding the title and making the property effectively unsellable until resolved. The letter gave me 14 days to respond. It was an escalation designed to create panic. I forwarded it to Gerald and kept building. The second thing was a visit from Roy Briggs. He came alone, no folder, no prepared speech. He knocked on my door on a Wednesday evening looking like a man who had not been sleeping well. I let him in and we sat at the kitchen table. "I want you to know," he said, "that I did not know about the Airbnb. I knew she was managing the property, but she told me it was pro bono, community service during a difficult time for the estate." I watched his face. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. Not the performance of discomfort, the real kind. The kind that sits in a person's posture and makes them avoid eye contact. "What did you sign, Roy?" I asked. He exhaled. "She had me co-sign the property management authorization. She said it was standard procedure for vacant estate properties under HOA oversight. I did not. I should have read it more carefully." "Did you sign anything else?" A longer pause. "Some expense approvals. For the furniture. The renovations. She said they were HOA beautification fund expenditures. Properties that affect community appearance." I kept my voice even. "The HOA has a beautification fund?" "Diane created it 3 years ago," he said quietly. "I am the treasurer. I should have..." He stopped, pressed his hands flat on the table. "I think I have been used, Marcus." I thought about what Gerald had said. Roy does whatever she says. I do not think he fully understands what he is signing. Roy was not innocent. Negligence at the level of treasurer carries its own liability. But he was not Diane. He had not engineered this. He had been a useful instrument, trusting, incurious, loyal to someone who had leveraged all 3 of those qualities against him. "Roy," I said carefully, "if you want to help yourself, you need to talk to an attorney. Your own attorney, not one connected to Diane or the HOA. And you need to preserve every document you have access to, every approval, every fund statement, every communication." He nodded slowly. "The third piece of advice," I said, "do not tell Diane you came here." He left 20 minutes later. I watched his car back out of the driveway and disappear. Then I called Gerald. "Roy Briggs just gave us the beautification fund," I said. Gerald was quiet for a moment. "That is the HOA embezzlement thread," he said. "Pull it." The beautification fund had been collecting dues contributions for 3 years. Every homeowner in Crystal Cove had been paying into it $75 per quarter, per household. 19 homes, 12 quarters. That was $1,700 in collected contributions, minimum, sitting in an account that Diane controlled exclusively. The forensic accountant Gerald had retained a woman named Patricia Osei, who had spent 12 years doing financial fraud investigations, pulled the HOA's tax filings, the bank records Roy had quietly provided copies of, and the expense documentation Diane had submitted at board meetings. Her preliminary finding took 4 days. Of the $17,100 collected into the beautification fund, approximately $4,200 could be tied to actual community expenditures, a new entrance sign, some landscaping near the clubhouse, exterior paint on the common building. The remaining $12,900 had been disbursed through vendor payments to 2 companies. Both companies, when Patricia ran their registration details, traced back to Diane Holloway. Shell companies, registered in different names, one in her maiden name, one in what appeared to be a variation of her middle name. Both with P.O. box addresses, both with no verifiable business operations, No websites, no physical presence. She had been invoicing her own HOA through fake companies and paying herself with community funds. Patricia's report was careful and precise. 41 pages. Every transaction traced, every discrepancy noted, every shell company connection documented with state business registration records. I read it twice. Then I called Walt. He came over that evening along with Carol Weston and Dennis Park. We sat around my aunt's kitchen table, the one that had been there for 30 years, solid oak, one of the few original pieces Diane had not replaced. I walked them through the findings without editorializing. Just the numbers. Just the trail. When I finished, the room was quiet. Walt looked at the table. Carol had her hands pressed together in her lap. Dennis stared out toward the lake. "She has been stealing from all of us," Dennis said finally. Not a question. "Patricia's findings suggest yes," I said. "The Airbnb income from my property, the beautification fund disbursements, the expense approvals Roy co-signed, it is a layered scheme. Each piece has some degree of deniability on its own. Together they form a clear pattern." Carol looked up. "What happens now?" "We file," I said. "Criminal complaint to the state attorney general. Separate complaint to the state real estate regulatory board regarding the unauthorized rental operation. IRS referral for the unreported rental income. And we respond to the lien threat by countersuing for conversion, fraud, and document forgery." Walt nodded slowly. "You are going after everything." "She built this over 6 years," I said. "She was careful and she was patient. I intend to be more careful and more patient." I looked at the three of them. "But I need you all to give formal statements. On record. Everything you witnessed, every fine, every suspicious meeting, every document that did not look right." One by one, they nodded. We filed on a Thursday morning. Gerald submitted everything simultaneously: the Attorney General complaint, the Real Estate Board referral, the IRS disclosure, and our counter-response to the lien threat. Patricia Osei's forensic report went in as a supporting exhibit. The Airbnb transaction records, the forged signature analysis, the shell company registrations, Roy's documents, and the formal statements from Walt, Carol, and Dennis, all of it packaged and submitted in a single, comprehensive filing. Gerald called it a document bomb. I called it 14 months of Diane's choices meeting 14 days of mine. We did not notify Diane. We did not send a warning letter. We did not give her attorney a courtesy call. Gerald was clear on that point. The moment she knew the full scope of what we had filed, she would start moving assets and deleting records. The authorities needed to move first. I went back to the property and waited. 4 days passed. Quiet ones. I repainted the back deck, which had been neglected under the guest-ready aesthetic Diane had imposed. I reinstalled the bookshelf brackets my aunt had used. I found 3 of her ceramic pieces in a storage unit I would located through the estate records, a local facility about 6 miles from the property. Diane had removed and stored them, presumably to make the space look cleaner for guests. I brought them back and put them where they belonged. On the 5th day, a state investigator contacted Gerald. On the 7th day, 2 investigators from the Attorney General's Financial Crimes Unit drove into Crystal Cove and spent 4 hours in the HOA clubhouse with Diane, Roy, and Patrice. I watched the cars from my front porch. Said nothing. Did nothing. Just watched. That evening, Walt texted me 2 words. They came. I already knew. What I did not know, what I found out from Gerald the following morning, was that during the interview, Diane had made a significant mistake. Faced with Patricia's forensic report and the shell company documentation, she had attempted to explain the beautification fund disbursements as legitimate vendor payments. She had provided the investigators with her own set of records. Those records contradicted the bank statements Roy had provided. Directly. Provably. On specific transaction dates and amounts. She had handed investigators evidence that she had falsified financial records. Gerald's voice on the phone was the calmest I had ever heard it. "She just turned a civil fraud matter into a criminal one," he said. "On her own. In a recorded interview. With state investigators." I sat with that for a moment. 6 years of careful, patient, methodical theft. And at the critical moment when the walls were closing in and the documents were all stacked against her, she had panicked. She had done what people who believe they are the smartest person in the room always eventually do. She had improvised. And she had improvised badly. The lien threat dissolved first. Gerald filed our counter-response with the court, and attached the Attorney General's case number as a reference. Diane's attorney withdrew the lien proceeding within 48 hours. No explanation, no negotiation. Just gone. The legal equivalent of someone quietly leaving a room they had entered too confidently. Then the HOA board collapsed. Patrice Engel resigned her community standards position by email on a Monday morning. No explanation given. Roy Briggs submitted a formal resignation as treasurer 3 days later, along with a written statement to the remaining homeowners acknowledging that he had co-signed documents without adequate review and accepting responsibility for his role. It was the statement of a man trying to get ahead of what was coming. That left Diane as the sole remaining board member of a 3-person board. Under the original CC&Rs, the ones my aunt had helped write in 1988, the ones Diane had spent 6 years quietly amending around the edges, but had never fully replaced, a board could not conduct official business with fewer than 2 members. Every action Diane took from that point forward had no legal standing. She was board president of nothing. Walt called me the evening after Roy's resignation. "There are 11 homeowners who want to hold an emergency election," he said. "Reconstitute the board properly. Get the finances under independent review." "You should do that," I said. "We would like you involved." I thought about it. "I will attend. I will not join the board. This is your community. But I will be there." The emergency meeting happened on a Saturday afternoon in the clubhouse. 14 of the 19 homeowners showed up. Diane did not. Walt was elected board president by unanimous vote. Carol Weston and a quiet man named Herb Taggart took the other 2 seats. The first motion they passed was to authorize an independent financial audit of all HOA accounts going back 6 years. The second motion was to formally void all fines issued without documented bylaw citations which, when reviewed, turned out to include most of the fines Patrice had issued over the past 3 years. Susan Hale got her $450 back. Dennis Park's excess dues increases were logged for review. I sat in the back row and watched it happen. 14 neighbors reclaiming something that had been slowly taken from them. No drama, no speeches. Just people in folding chairs doing the quiet work of putting something right. After the meeting, Carol found me by the door. "Your aunt would have been at the front of this room," she said. I nodded. Did not trust my voice for a moment. "She actually was," I said finally. "She is the one who wrote the original CC&Rs that made all of this possible." Carol smiled. "A real one. The kind that does not require calculation." I drove back to the property as the sun dropped behind the tree line and the lake turned gold. The criminal charges came 6 weeks later. I was not there when it happened. I did not need to be. Gerald called me on a Tuesday morning, his voice carrying the particular flatness of someone delivering news they have been anticipating for a long time. Diane Holloway had been charged with 4 counts. Document forgery for the fabricated access authorization letter bearing my aunt's signature. Wire fraud for the unauthorized collection and retention of Airbnb rental income. Financial fraud for the shell company disbursements from HOA funds. And a 4th count, the one that took longest, to build theft by deception, covering the full scope of the scheme across all its components. Gerald read through the charges methodically, the way he did everything. When he finished, he added one more detail. "The IRS referral generated a separate inquiry," he said. "The rental income was unreported across all 14 months. That is a civil matter initially, but it compounds the financial exposure significantly." I did the math quietly in my head. $68,400 in Airbnb income, $12,400 in shell company disbursements from HOA funds. Back taxes, penalties, and interest on unreported income, legal fees. Civil damages we were pursuing separately for conversion and fraud. The $47,500 invoice she had tried to collect from my aunt's estate, which our countersuit had flipped into evidence of attempted extortion. Diane Holloway had spent 6 years building what she thought was an impenetrable financial arrangement. Elderly targets, controlled information, a board she had filled with people too trusting or too intimidated to look closely. What she had actually built was a paper trail. Every transaction recorded. Every shell company registered. Every forged signature preserved in a document she had filed with her own HOA. Every Airbnb booking logged in a system that maintained its own independent records regardless of what she deleted on her end. She had been meticulous in her theft and meticulous in her documentation of it. I thought about the folder she had handed me on that first morning. The invoice, the receipts, the carefully organized justification for $47,500 in services rendered. She had brought it to me like a weapon. Like something that would make me feel small and overwhelmed and eager to settle. Instead, it had been the first brick in the wall we built around her. Gerald asked if I wanted to make a statement to the press. A local news outlet had picked up the story, HOA president charged with fraud and forgery, scheme spanning 6 years. I told him no. There was nothing I needed to say publicly. The documents said everything. The charges said everything. My aunt's original CCNRs, still intact under all those years of Diane's amendments, had said everything. They just needed someone willing to read them carefully. I hung up and went out to the back deck. The lake was still. Early morning, mist on the water, the kind of quiet that had drawn my aunt here in the first place. I sat down and had my coffee. The civil case settled 4 months after the criminal charges were filed. Diane's attorney contacted Gerald with an offer 3 weeks into the discovery process. Once they understood the full scope of Patricia Osei's forensic report, and once they realized that Airbnb's transaction records left no interpretive room whatsoever, the offer came quickly. Full restitution of the $68,400 in rental income. Reimbursement of all legal fees. A separate civil payment covering damages for the forged document and unauthorized property access. And a formal written acknowledgement, signed and notarized, that the $47,500 invoice had no legal basis and was hereby voided permanently. Gerald called it a clean result. I called it accountability with paperwork. The criminal case moved on its own timeline. Those things always do. But the charges held. Diane entered a plea agreement 8 months later that included 2 felony convictions, restitution payments to the HOA covering the shell company disbursements, and 3 years of supervised probation. Her attorney had argued for leniency given her age and lack of prior record. The judge acknowledged those factors and sentenced accordingly. No prison time. I had expected that. White-collar crime against elderly victims in a civil community rarely results in incarceration, regardless of how cleanly the case is built. That was a frustration I had made peace with early on because Gerald had prepared me for it. What mattered was the record. The convictions. The restitution. The permanent documentation of exactly what she had done and to whom. Diane Holloway sold her house in Crystal Cove 7 months after the plea agreement. I do not know where she went. I did not follow that thread. It was not relevant to anything I needed. The new HOA board completed its independent audit and published the findings to all 19 homeowners. The audit confirmed Patricia's analysis and identified 2 additional years of questionable fund management predating our filing. Several homeowners filed their own civil claims against Diane for the excess fines and dues. Walt ran the board with the careful steadiness of a civil engineer, methodical, transparent, documented. He sent monthly financial summaries to every homeowner. At the first full community meeting under the new board, he proposed reinstating the original 1988 CCNRs as the governing document, with only amendments that had been properly noticed and voted on by homeowners. It passed unanimously. My aunt's work. Still standing after 36 years. Outlasting the person who had spent 6 of them trying to bury it. I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. About how the things people build carefully, with intention, with integrity, with real concern for the people around them, tend to have a durability that outlasts the people who try to dismantle them. My aunt had known that. She had built accordingly. I was starting to understand what that meant for me and this property going forward. I stayed. That probably surprises people when I tell them. A lakefront property, a resolved legal battle, a clean title, most people would sell, take the equity, move on. Treat it as a windfall and a story to tell at dinner parties. But I had spent 4 months living in my aunt's house while all of this unfolded. I had repainted her deck. I had brought her ceramic pieces back from storage and put them where they belonged. I had sat on that back porch in the early mornings watching the mist lift off the lake and understood, slowly and then all at once, what 31 years of holding something means. My aunt had not held this property because it was valuable. She had held it because it was hers. I requested a remote work arrangement from my firm. They agreed without much pushback. Accountants who can work from anywhere are useful to keep. I set up a proper office in the spare room, the one Diane had converted into a bunk room for her Airbnb guests. I put the bunk beds in the garage and replaced them with a desk, a bookshelf, and a lamp my aunt had kept in storage. It felt right immediately, the way some things do when they are returned to their correct place. Walt became a genuine friend over those months. We had dinner twice a week through the winter, usually at his place, talking about the lake and the community and occasionally about the case, but mostly about other things. His engineering career, my aunt's early years at the property, the way Crystal Cove had looked before the newer houses went in. Carol Weston organized a small community gathering in the spring. Nothing formal, just neighbors on someone's back lawn with food, and the kind of easy conversation that had apparently been missing from this community for years. Diane's presence had cast a particular kind of chill, the kind you do not fully register until it is gone. Susan Hale brought wind chimes as a joke gift for the host. Everyone laughed. The sound of them in the breeze was genuinely pleasant. I stood at the edge of the lawn that evening, plate in hand, watching the lake catch the last of the daylight. Dennis Park came and stood beside me. "Your aunt used to come to these," he said, "back when we had them." "I know," I said. "She talked about this place all the time." He nodded. "She would be glad you are here." I looked out at the water. 31 years she had held this view. Built something worth having. Left it to someone she trusted. I was not going to let it go. There is something I think about sometimes. Late in the evenings when the lake is dark and the community is quiet. Diane Holloway was not stupid. That is the part people get wrong when they hear this story. They imagine a cartoon villain, obvious, loud, easy to spot. But she was intelligent, organized, and genuinely patient. She had built her scheme carefully over years, layering each piece on top of the last, creating just enough plausible deniability at every level to make confronting her feel more trouble than it was worth. She had picked her targets well. Elderly residents. People without the energy or resources to push back. A dying woman who loved a lakefront property and could not be there to protect it. What she had not accounted for was the dying woman's nephew. Not because I am exceptional. I am an accountant from Ohio who inherited a property and found a changed lock on the door. What I had was not special skill. It was time, attention, and the willingness to be methodical when everything in me wanted to be loud. My aunt had taught me that without knowing she was teaching it. Every summer I spent here as a kid, she was the same, calm, deliberate, thorough. She kept her paperwork organized. She read documents before she signed them. She built things meant to last. I learned from watching her. The legal knowledge helped too, and I want to be clear about that for anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation. Document forgery is a criminal offense in every state. Unauthorized rental of someone else's property is conversion, civil theft. HOA boards operating outside their CC&Rs have no legal authority. And if you are ever handed a document and something about the signature does not look right, trust that instinct and get it examined. Forensic document analysis exists precisely for moments like that. The tools were always there. They just needed someone willing to use them. I still have coffee on the back deck most mornings. The lake does what it has always done, changes with the light, changes with the season, stays fundamentally itself. The ceramic pieces are back on the shelf where my aunt kept them. The oak table is still in the kitchen. Diane's chalkboard sign is gone. In its place, on the kitchen counter, I put a framed photograph. My aunt on this dock, sometime in the late 90s, laughing at something off camera. Young and certain and completely at home. She built something worth having. I am keeping it.